as of today here at the London Book Fair. And suddenly Sir Ken's in London, and I'm really grateful that he was here today to meet many of his foreign publishing partners, and to be in the epicenter of world publishing at the London Book Fair is an interesting thing. For example, he met with his Chinese and Taiwanese agent to be with a Polish publisher. And this new book?
Well, it's a book for parents, and I wrote it because I've written a lot of books in the past, around education, and I've referred to parents, and I am a parent, but I've never really addressed an entire book to parents. And so I want to do that because, in my experience, a lot of parents are very anxious about what's happening in education. They're not sure what the right thing is that they should be doing for their children just now. And I think sometimes because of that, they often unwittingly put their kids under the wrong sort of pressure. So it's a book about childhood, about the kind of education our children need and what parents can do to help them get it.
Well, I was invited to give a lecture at Fielding University graduate school in Santa Barbara, California, by my client Jean-Pierre Isbouts. And I wound up at a dinner table after the lecture, or during the lecture, and there was a woman sitting there whose name was Lady Terry Robinson. And she sat next to me and she said, "Oh, I have a writer that I want you to meet." And I said, "Who is that?" And she told me it was her husband. And that's essentially how I met Sir Ken Robinson, through his wife Terry, who met me at a dinner party.
My wife Terry is also a writer, and she had just written a novel called India's Summer. And she was invited there, I can't remember who the original invitation came from, but to talk about that book, because she was looking for a publisher. And she started to talk about the book, she was telling me afterwards, and kind of sensed that it wasn't right for that particular group, that it wasn't the thing they were looking for. And so she switched mid-presentation, when she knew what Peter did, to start telling Peter about the book that I was working on, which was originally called Epiphany, because I had given this talk at TED where I was talking about the dancer Gillian Lynn, and previous to that I'd been at some other event where I told that story, and I said I'm writing a book about these things and we're going to call it Epiphany, because that was the original name for the book. The idea of an epiphany is of a sudden transformative experience, like a road to Damascus thing. And it's not always like that. Sometimes, when people discover the thing they love to do, if they do that, it's a bit like being in love with somebody. That's why love is important. The book was called How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And sometimes, people see somebody and it's an instant thing, they fall in love with them. But I think that's relatively rare. I think it more often happens that you become in love with somebody over time. You meet them and suddenly you realise after a while that this relationship has started to shift somehow and your feelings are different. So that's an equally important, perhaps more common way of falling in love with people, that you become in love with them rather than drop, like to your knees at the first sight of somebody. You may have an initial attraction, but people are attracted to all kinds of people they don't end up falling in love with.
But that project taught me a lesson, because I never lose. Either I win or I learn. And what I learned by losing with not being able to sell Epiphany was the pitch that I developed when I was selling The Element. But I just want to tell the story about your meeting Lou. Sir Ken's in my office in New York. We had tried to place the Epiphany with several publishers, and it wasn't working. So I'm with Sir Ken, and I said, "Sir Ken, you need to work with an author because you have such a busy schedule that can help you shape your ideas, a professional author." And he said he didn't know one. And I said, "Well, I know someone." I introduced Sir Ken to Lou Aronica. I called Lou Aronica and I said, "Lou, I have somebody I want you to speak with. And I think you might be interested because Lou is very interested in education." is rearing several children, and I arranged for a call. And after Lou and Sir Ken spoke, Lou called me immediately and said to me, he said, "Peter, I don't care what you have to do, but make sure I work on that book with Sir Ken." And that became a New York Times bestseller.
Lou is fantastic, and we had a great partnership over now
Four books.
4 books, yeah. No, the original idea for the book, when it was being called Epiphany, came about because I told that story of Gillian Lynn at a conference. I was with my wife, Terry, and at the end of the conference I said, "I'm going to write a book of these stories." And people clapped, and I came off stage, and Terry said, "When are you going to write that book?" I said, "Which book?" It was a rhetorical device. I wasn't serious about it. And she said, "No, you have to write that book." So the original idea, we worked on the proposal for it, the original idea was a kind of compilation of stories like that, maybe 10 stories, with a chapter on each. Of, Gillian Lynn would be one, and we'd find a spread of people, and just
Robert De Niro.
Yes, that's right. We had a whole list of them.
There were a whole list of famous
athletes
people. Sir Paul McCartney,
Yeah,
Mick Fleetwood,
yeah.
Sir Ridley Scott.
That's right.
There were a lot of famous people in that collection of Epiphanies.
And there would be a chapter on each. I'd interview them, we'd tell their story, then there'd be another one, maybe top and tail it. And we took that proposal to Penguin. And I remember Catherine Court, who you introduced me to, and that was fantastic encounter. And Catherine said, we like the idea of this, but really a kind of compendium of stories, isn't it? There's a better book here. And what would be more interesting would be a book that's not just examples of people finding the thing they have to do, but what it means to do that, and the issues it raises. And I thought, well, that actually makes sense, but yeah, you have to write that book. That's not a set of interviews. And then we talked about it, and it kind of went on for a little while, and we'd worked on the proposal. That's right. You'd introduced me to Lou at that point, because Peter properly recognised I was hurtling around the planet. I'd written other books, but this particular one needed to find a bigger market, and he just wisely said, "Look, would you work with somebody else, because you're doing all these other things, and work with another writer who could actually help to accelerate the process."
Turned out to be a good relationship.
And it's been a great relationship.
And this is Lou, right here with Ken. So they had a good run of it, 4 books. But what I learned in representing Epiphanies is I'm a salesman. That's what I do best. I sell books. I've been doing it for 46 or so years. I think I've sold over 1,500 books. Up to number 6 that I'm involved with Sir Ken. And what I learned was the pitch was that when you have an epiphany, it accelerates movement in your brain. And if it constantly pushes your brain to want to do something and you achieve that goal, you wind up in your element. Well, I'm in my element, he's in his element, and that was my pitch, and that's what sold the book. So we've been with Catherine, and we're going to continue with Catherine, and it's kind of worked out really well. So I'm grateful for you as a client and a friend.